thank you very much for making here today. My name is Daniel Silva, and today I'll be talking about managing and automating Azure DevOps using PowerShell. First and foremost, huge thanks to our sponsors. We already know those are really difficult times, so without their help, we wouldn't be here. So huge thanks for that. For those of you who know me and those who don't, again, my name is Daniel Silva and I'm from Portugal. First time I was in this conference, I was as a software developer with huge love for automation, especially PowerShell. Nowadays, and partially thanks to this conference, I'm a DevOps engineer with a main focus on helping all the teams to be productive and automate work. So I still do a lot of automation. I try to automate boring process, things that can be time-consuming and error-prone. And usually I also advocate for PowerShell. It's not that usually used, at least from the scenarios that I come from. And also advocate for frameworks like Terraform, Docker, and started focusing also on Kubernetes. So for the agenda, this will be like heavy focused on demos, but I'll be giving a quick introduction about what is Azure DevOps. I assume that since it's a session focused on Azure DevOps, you might be familiar with it. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to raise your hand. If there are a lot of questions, we might move those to the end of the session. Also, I'll give you an introduction to keywords and concepts. We'll be talking about VSTeam and native API calls, which are the two types that I'll be using throughout this demo to interact with Azure DevOps. And on the demo side, we'll be focusing on installing and set up the VS module, the VSTeam module. We'll be adding, removing, and updating work items, add sprints, create pull requests, and if we have time, I'll also briefly talk about removing pipeline agents. So, what is Azure DevOps? Well, in essence, it's what I usually call Microsoft all-in-one in product. So it's focused on those three. In these three cases, those are definitions taken from their documentation website. So basically, we'll be focusing on the three components. There are more, but we'll be focusing on Azure Boards, which is a set of tools used for Agile, Kanban, Scrum methodologies, and different use cases. We'll be using also Azure Repos, which is the Git side of things, like similarly to GitHub, and also Azure Pipelines for our CI/CD. So as for the keywords and concepts, I'll be using what is called a PAT, or a personal access token, which is an authentication token that we need to use to make the calls against the Azure Repos API, and also it's what is used by the VSTeam module. Again, quick introduction. So on Azure DevOps, we have this concept of organization, which is like the top level hierarchy in the Azure DevOps. Then each organization can have multiple projects, can be one, can be multiple, and also for each project we can have one or multiple teams. So usually the way we do this or the way it's usually done is if you have a product or a project, you place it under your organization, and then you assign all the people that is on your Azure DevOps organization, and you assign them to the teams. This allows you to have segmentation on both what the team can see, how a team are organized. Different teams can move at different paces, using different sprints and such. And also, there is also this concept of an agent. So when you run a pipeline, you actually usually run it within an agent. And an agent can run within a VM, can be an old computer, can be a container, and anything like that. Last but not least, there's also this concept of a work item, which will be used on our boards. And the work item is a generic name for what is usually a task or a user story an issue, an epic. So those are the different names that can be used with different methodologies. So for the demos, as I said, this is like what we'll be focusing on today. So just to give you a whole idea, this is the main page for the organization in Azure DevOps. In this case, the name of the organization is the name of my account, and I have here different projects. So we'll be focusing on this PSConfEU 22 board. Project. So again, we have overviews, we have the boards, the repos, and the pipelines. As I said, there are more components such as the test plans and the artifacts, but I won't be focusing on that for this session. I also have all the code will be available both on the Git project for this specific project. I'll make this available, publicly available after the session, and probably I'll place a link on the references for our PSConfEU sessions. So this has a bunch of scripts that are the ones that we'll be using, and we start off with the simple installation of the module for the VSTeam module. I already have it installed. The Wi-Fi can be quite unstable here, but I already have it on my side. And then the least that you need, at least to start using this, is you install the module. You have to have an account. So the concept that I say that is an account is usually the whole URL to your organization, and then you need to have the personal access token. I have the personal access token loaded on my profile. If you saw Walter's session earlier, I should have set it up on a vault, but for demo purpose, I did not. And you simply run the set VSTeam account, and you specify the account and the access token. I also have this set on my profile, so whenever I fire up my PowerShell console, this loads up. The way that you can get the personal access token is by coming to the top right side, and then you have these personal access tokens. And you can generate as many tokens as you want or as you need. It's usually good practice to just give the required permissions. In this case, for the sake of the demo, I gave it a full access. In case something goes bad, you can revoke the access. If you lose the access to the access token, you can regenerate it without having to specify the whole scope of things that you need for that. So when you have it, it gives you the one time that you can copy this and store it somewhere safe. Obviously, our PS profile is not the safest place. And so essentially, we just install it and it is ready to be used. Throughout this session, I'll be showing, it can seem like it's random use cases, but those were actually cases that I used on my previous company. And, well, not actually this first one, but just to get started, and you can see how easy we can interact with this. I think it's quite readable, but essentially I'm iterating through 1 to 30 object or array of 30 elements, and for each one of those I'm actually creating a work item. So if I come to the board here, you can see that I don't have any items created, but running this will actually output that I'm currently creating all of those tasks. And as you can see here, those tasks just have some random name like change field and the number of the task. And it also has these brackets. And the reason for that, I'll show you in a second. This was also one of the use cases that I used it. But just to keep in mind that I have this special syntax for some reason. But yeah, I've created the tasks. So if I try to refresh it here, I can also see that within like 10 seconds, not that, I've created like 30 tasks. And this was just to get started. So you can also specify a different type of tasks that you want to create. So in this case, I've created tasks. For this setup, I'm using the basic methodology. So I have tasks and I have issues. And just to differentiate for the next use case scenarios, I'll be creating some different, in this case, work items that are of the type issue. And if you see here, I have this that is called Diacritics, and this exception, we'll just ignore it for now. But we have this kind of diacritics. This is a word that I've learned while using the use case for this. So essentially what we have is some special characters like the trema, some kind of accent. And the reason why this is so important is that this is really common in Portuguese. And by the time that I got started with DevOps position, one of the first things that we did, that I was asked to do, was moving from Jira to Azure DevOps. And we had hundreds of tasks and work items and user stories and things like that. And they wanted to keep those, they wanted to move that history from Jira to Azure DevOps. So I found some code that was able to export all the Jira tickets into a CSV. And then what I tried to do was to find a way to actually import that into Azure DevOps. There was like this use case that they said like, if it's really hard to do because it's hundreds of tasks and work items, we just ignore it and we start over again. And I said, give me like a day and let me try to see what I can do. So I came with this solution where actually I was able to move everything. So the real use case was I imported the task. So I did the add VS work item, specified the name, and then try to import it into Azure DevOps. Before going into that example, just a quick, this is the first use case that we have the difference between using the VSTeam and using the native API calls. So the VSTeam module is maintained by the community, and it is simply awesome and lifts a lot of work for you, but there are some use cases that are not covered. For instance, you can get a VS work item, but to get the work item, you can't get a list of work items. You need to specify the ID of the work item. But if you don't know the ID, you can't really ask for that information. So in this case, what I did was I created a simple commandlet that, given the project, the team, and the organization, and if I specify the work item type, I actually make a call through the native API where I pass the token. So we have here the build-up of the invoke REST methods where I actually set the authorization to be my bearer token. And then, if you are familiar with the VSTS and SQL, this is essentially the query that I'm running. So I'm saying, whenever I make this call, give me the ID, the title, and the state of the work items for the given work item type that I asked for. So running this and having having the command here, then we can go to the actual use case that I was mentioning. So we I was able to migrate everything from Jira to Azure DevOps, but there was this use case or this scenario where all the Jira tickets had the brackets with the Jira number. So it was something like Jira dash the number of the ticket and then the whole title for the work item. And as I said, this was also mostly in Portuguese, so we had some special characters. And after I actually do the first iteration and try to replace with a simple regex to remove the brackets and everything that's within that, when I run the update VS work item command, it actually threw an error saying that was some kind of encoding error for this use case. This was almost 2 years ago. So when I was preparing this session, I tried exactly to replicate the same scenario, but it didn't happen. So I assumed that the error with the encoding was fixed on their API side, but I decided that could be something that would be interesting to show here. So what I'm doing here is that calling the previous commandlet that I've just created, I'm saying, give me all the work items of the type issue, and for those I get the ID, and then I can actually call the VS work item and I can pass either one ID on a list of IDs, and for those, give me the ID and the title. So this should be giving me all the items that are actually issues. So we have here with the special characters, and when I first got the error, something related to the encoding, to be honest, I didn't know how to do, so I did what I think any good programmer do, which is I went to Google, searched for PowerShell encoding or Azure DevOps encoding error, and I found a Stack Overflow issue mentioning that there was a PowerShell function or a commandlet that someone created to convert what are called the diacritic characters. So this essentially runs some commands to remove the special characters, and I've set everything within a for each object. And the reason why the function is inside the for each is because when I'm running the parallel, if I have the function outside the for each parallel, it doesn't know the function. So the best way that I found was to actually just put the function inside the for each parallel. It might not be the best way to do so, but it's the only way that I knew at the time, and it did the job. So as you can imagine, as I said, these run for like hundreds of work items, and running with the parallel actually made it go way faster against hundreds of tasks. So if you can see here, we had the cafe with the accent, and now it doesn't have it anymore, and everything we just removed everything for those special characters, as well as this issue UX and some $sign. There was a typo here. I forgot to add the number of the task. So coming back here, also something that we will be using will be the queries. So in order to be easier, I think it's readable. If I try to see the work items that are actually an issue, and I run the query, we can see here that we have removed everything from the name of the issue. So this was like the first time that I was able to shine and show PowerShell to people, because they were like, those are hundreds of tasks. I can find a way to actually just quickly remove that. And within a day, I was able to run the regex and just remove all the special characters. Another use case that also happened within the same client was that we had this organization, and the organization had multiple teams. And as I mentioned, each team can have they had multiple projects, and each product can have multiple teams. And there is this concept of sprints when you are working with Azure boards or agile methodologies or Scrum or any of those methodologies. So if you come here to the boards, we can discard these queries. If you come to the sprints, in this case, this is empty, but we can either create a new sprint from scratch, or you can use existing iterations. And those existing iterations can be found on the project configuration. So in this case, this is empty, but I can come here and add a new sprint, type the starting date, type the end date, and type the name of the iteration, and I can create it, and then I go back to the board and start that sprint for the team. Although this it's quite intuitive and can be done quite quickly. What would happen is that usually there was the same project manager or the same person responsible for multiple projects, and each team can start sprints at different days, and you can have multiple teams from different projects. So every time that the project manager needed to have a sprint, he would need to come here, add a new iteration, give it a name, give it a start date, an end date, and then you'll need to make the calculations, because some teams have sprints of 1 week, others have sprints of 2 weeks. And they had this use case that for each sprint, they would give a name, and then the name of the sprint with a number, and then the name of some dish or some country or something like that. So although it takes like 2 minutes to create one of these iterations, if you multiply this for 7, 8, 10 teams and 5 projects, you can easily have like 50 teams. Each can have different sprints. So you can see that it can actually take some time. So what I did was I actually had found this API that gives you the names of the countries. And then for that, I got it returns a JSON. I select just to get the name of the country. And then whenever, well, for this case, I'm using the get date, but it could depend on if, as I said, some teams had sprints of 1 week, others had sprints of 2 weeks. So my end date would be just simply adding the number of days for a sprint from one sprint from the beginning to the end. And if I run this, I can quickly create like 5 sprints. And I've left the company like 2 or 3 months, but I think when I've created sprints for them, I think they have sprints until like the end of the next year, because it was just so fast and so simple to create it. They had like as you can see here, we have sprints for Germany, Morocco, Belgium. So these actually reflect on having sprints or iterations for one project. And if I wanted to do this for the other project, I would simply need to change the name of the project here and specify the start date and the end date for those cases. So with this, it was quite simple for them afterwards to just come to the sprint. And when they wanted to start a new sprint, all they had to do was come for a iteration and then start that for the given sprint for the workload. So I have here a sprint. At the moment, it's empty because I've just created it. So let's just add some random work items just to showcase the next use case. So this is also something that you can use. So don't be fooled, or don't do it like I did. At first, I thought that I wasn't able to mass edit through the UI, but you actually can. So the queries are quite powerful. And if you come to open the queries, you can do all sorts of, well, not all sorts, but you can do a lot of work through here. So in this case, let's say that I want to assign those 3 work items to me. It will be the task to change the field 2, 3, and 5. I can select here and I can assign it to me. And also, as you can see here, you can edit multiple fields at the same time. So I'll be changing, it doesn't show here like on the top, but you can see I can change here the state. It's on the to-do, so I'll be doing this. And I'll also change the iteration path to be to the current sprint. So by doing so, I can save the items. And if we come to the sprints, I have here 3 tasks that I'm currently supposedly working on. So this takes me to the next example, which was to take full advantage of Azure DevOps, because this is closely integrated. You can actually go to a work item and you can specify the development. You can create a new branch. You can assign an existing branch. You can assign it to a pull request. So if I come here, the practice that we usually followed was whenever there was a new sprint or you started to work on a new work item, you would actually create a new branch, name it like the name of the feature that you are working on, and you can create a close relationship to this case. So if I create here a branch and call it like feature demo, I can start it from the main, and I'll edit the fields 2 and 5, which are the tasks that I said that I'm responsible for doing. So in this case, I've created a branch. It's based on the main branch. And if I come here to my work items, I can see here, I don't know if it's visible on the back, but I have here my demo feature linked to this development. And what does this allow me to do? Well, it actually allows me to, whenever I make a change and then I create a pull request, it will be linked, the pull request, it say, hey, these are all the work items that are assigned to this pull request. And why is this relevant? Well, this allowed us to create a really nice workflow, which is, in this case, I'm on the demo, and just to trigger a pull request, I just make some change on this markdown file and say hello PSConfEU 22, and I'll commit this. So usually this would be, you'll create a branch on your local development, make the change that you need to do, then commit it. And as you can see here, I can already create a pull request. I can either create it from here, or I can come here to the pull requests. And when creating a pull request, something that you can see here is that it already linked those 3 work items. And this is really interesting, that in the sense that when I create this, what will actually happen, which I'll show you in a second, is that before the session started, I already set up my Git so that I can have a pipeline running whenever there's a pull request to my main branch. And the way that I did it is coming to the branches. And as you can see, this small icon, it says that this branch has policies. And by opening this, you can either go to the branch and then come to this section, or you can go to the settings and then scroll to the repositories and select the branch that you want to have policies. So in this case, it has one pipeline that is called update work items that will be triggered automatically. For some reason, this doesn't show the first time, but the pipeline that runs is a pipeline that I created, and I'll show you in a second. It will trigger automatically whenever there is an update to the pipeline, or sorry, to the pull request. It is optional, meaning that even if this pipeline fails for some reason, it won't stop the PR to be merged. And it will also run again whenever there's an update to the main branch. So what does this pipeline actually do? It's actually, if you're not familiar with the syntax, it's a YAML for the Azure pipeline. It will run on Windows, and it has a job that is updating work item that will actually install the VSTeam module for the current user, and then will run a script. By running this script, it will pass some variables like the name of the project, the pull request ID, which is a built-in variable that is available on Azure pipelines. So in this case, it's the ID of the pull request, the access token, and 2 different fields called new state and tags to add. So I've told you that this is the pipeline that runs, but I haven't actually told you what it does. Essentially, what it does is all the work items that are assigned to that pull request, usually are the work items that the developer is working on, will actually, when this pipeline runs, move all those work items from the doing state to the block state, and then add the tags saying that it's waiting for feedback, it's under the PR, and the task is blocked, or in this case, task or issue. This is really nice because not only allowed the developers not to worry about keeping the status of the work items up to date and avoiding like team leads going like, hey, what is the status of this work item when it was already under the PR, but it also gives the visibility to the team leaders and the stakeholders to see, okay, so these are the items that are blocked, to who it is assigned, and this is the action that we need to perform. So the way it works is essentially, it has a param that accepts the parameters that I've just mentioned. It actually connects once again to the VSTeam account because it's running under a pipeline. So every time it runs, it will be a new execution, meaning that it doesn't keep the status for this use case. You could have containers or be running within the same agent every time just to be faster. Sorry. It will then use the VSTeam module to get the information about the pull request. So if it does find the pull request, by the given pull request ID that I passed on the parameter, it will then use, this is again a mix between using the VSTeam and the native API calls. which means that it will then make a request to get all the work items that are within this pull request. Then I get all the work items if there are work items and those match the criteria that I want, which is I only want to do something if it's a bug or a task because of the name of the status, or the state in this case. And if it's in doing, then what we'll do is that we'll move them to block and add the tags that I just specified of the under PR, waiting feedback, and blocked. So if this ends up running fine, it's already succeeded. So as you can see here, our work items are already on the block state. And if I come to the sprint, we can see that we have the tags blocked, under PR, and waiting feedback. So this was like a really automatic workflow. And as you can imagine, the project manager was really happy when working with like 10 or 20 people and not having to go poking everyone saying, hey, have you updated your work items? I see there's a pull request. What is the status of that? So they just had one central place to look for. I don't know if there's any questions for now. So another use case that we also had was there was this question or request that whenever there was a deployment into production, we could actually afterwards, after testing if everything is correct, make a pull request from one branch to the master branch. And usually what would happen was that whoever was responsible for creating, for deploying into production would then create a pull request from the development branch to the master branch, create a new tag, and ask for people to assign, to validate that and then approve the merge request. So what I actually did was having something as simple as using, again, the VSTeam module. You can get the repository ID, and for that you can create a pull request where you specify what is the source branch and what is the target branch. So usually this was quite easy to automate because the source branch was always the same. It was always the dev branch. But even so, there was this possibility where when these run within the pipeline, one of those built-in variables is also the name of the branch that it's currently running the pipeline. So if someone runs something from a feature branch, it will then could possibly create a pull request from the feature branch to the main branch. So you don't have to hard code the name like I did here, but I have this simple branch that is a demo branch called the PSConfEU demo, which, as we can see here, by running this, I get the repository ID, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a GUID. So this gives me the name of the branch, or sorry, the repository. So then I can just do add a pull request where the repository ID is the one that I've just mentioned, and there is this ref, the target, the name of the title for the pull request, and the description. So what the use case was that this run within a pipeline. So the name would be something like run pipeline X at the day X for this product, and then we had the description, which was also something that was automated, which was Azure DevOps allows you to have templates. So whenever there was this merge into the main branch, we usually grabbed everything that was within a template, place it under Markdown, and this used to be the description of the pull request. So this, in this case, is the pull request number 15. So if we come to our pull requests, we can see here there is this testing PR from the VSTeam PowerShell module, and it is a merge from the branch to the main one. The reason why this is said that's created by me is that, again, this is using my personal access token. So this is the downside that I found to this, which was whenever we automated everything like this, you need to specify an access token, and I haven't found a way on Azure DevOps to use something like a service account. So this is always bound to a user, and that user needs to have some privileges. In this case, because I was the person responsible for managing the Azure DevOps, I used my access token to allow that. And I also have one more example to show, but I don't know if there's any questions. Yeah? Yeah.
Can't you just implement
So the questions were, the first one was how do I handle errors, right? So essentially the use case is like how you usually handle with normal PowerShell scripts. Some of the examples that I've showed you here, I usually run from my machine or from my side because were things that run sporadically, like creating sprints. I run it once and created multiple sprints for everyone. But usually if it's something that runs within a pipeline, I try to bind it with try catches or error handling to avoid errors. And one of the things that I usually do is like I showed on the build policy that run, which was even if this pipeline fails, do not prevent it from being merged. So usually there were two use cases, but if it was something that I wasn't totally sure that would work out of the box, I usually run on a different pipeline and set it up to actually be an optional policy requirement. So let's say that we had, for instance, we had the pipeline that always run the .NET build and .NET restore and .NET test. And if that pipeline, if the test failed for some reason, that pipeline would have the required policy. So this would mean that if the test failed or the code didn't compile, you weren't able to merge the pull request. But if I had something that I was testing or something that I wasn't sure that could possibly fail, I would actually put it as an optional and try to see if it failed. And if it failed, I'll try to see what was the error message and fix it. One of the use cases that also happened was, for instance, the update work item that runs whenever there is a pull request. One basic error that I did the first time that I didn't actually saw if there was any work items assigned, so the pipeline just blew up whenever someone forgot to assign work items for that. Does it answer your question? Okay. The other question was about the tokens, if I couldn't use something like Key Vault to store the tokens. Yeah, so obviously, as I mentioned, the way that I did this for this session is not the most secure way, because if you go to my profile, you can see my access token. But you can either have the PowerShell module for the secret store, where you can actually store the path there and load it whenever you need, or you could have an Azure Key Vault within Azure, and then you use your user account with AZ login and fetch the token from there. Does it make sense? Is there any more questions? Yeah?
I wanted to know if it's possible with this module to create a project on Azure DevOps and maybe from a file assigning the permission to user, maybe checking which kind of license, basic or Visual Studio subscriber, and like this.
So the question what you want to know is if it's possible to actually create a project from this module and check the permissions for users for descriptions that they have. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure if you can, but something that I didn't mention, but I do it all the time is whenever I start to work with a different module or something new, the two commands that I use the most is the get help and the get command. So here if I run the get command for this module and I try to find something like project, you can actually add the VSTeam project. So essentially you can create, like I did this PSConfEU here. I can create another one for a different project. About the permissions, I would say it's something like user. I can try it really fast to see. Minus project, maybe you don't even need a project. So yeah, you have it like how the user was created. You don't seem to have a way to, oops. I would say that if not directly through the module, you could go through the URL. So this, I assume that this would give you the URL for a specific user, and you could call Azure DevOps API and try to fetch it directly through the API if they support that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have any more questions? No? So I have 3 minutes, so I'll try to be really fast on this one, if this collaborates with me. So last example that I wanted to show that was also used was that when we started with Azure DevOps, you have this concept of agents. Agents is where your pipelines run, and by default, Microsoft gives you, I think it's 1 or 2 agents if your project is private. Then you can buy additional agents. And one of the things that you can do is actually you can create self-hosted agents. So when I said that an agent could be something that could run on a container or a VM or even on your local machine, what I meant is that, for instance, in this case, I have a Docker agent and then I have 2 different agents on my machine. So this allows you to, when you set it up, you specify a personal access token, you specify what pool do you want to use, and you can then have it running for your code. And the use case that we had was, because it was all new to us, and we didn't know that we could actually use always the same container name, we had an orchestration set up where we had every day at 7 a.m. we would spin up 10 Azure container instances, each with an agent, and those had some random names, which were strings with the GUIDs. And also, what would happen was, at the end of the day, we would destroy all those containers, and the next day we'll do the same. As those were GUIDs, it quickly filled up our agent pool. So if you see here the agent pool, you have all the jobs that run within this pool, but also you have which agents do you have. So one of the things that, and this is where, like, one of those use cases where the CLI beats the user interface is that if you want to remove a user agent, you need to come here and press delete, and then you type yes, and then you delete. So imagine doing this for like dozens of agents that run once a day. So what I did, and you can see that in more detail on the code that will be available. So I have here for instance, my pool. I get all the agents that are within one pool. Those have some internal objects that have some information like what is the operating system, when was the last time that it executed, what is its current status, if it's online or offline. So what I did was, in this case it's quite different, but in this case I'll be deleting all the agents that are use the operating system starts with Darwin, which is the code name for the Mac OS. So it asks me if I want to delete my own agent, and as you can see here, it's still here because it's not refreshed. But if I refresh, my agent is just gone. So what I did was usually where the last date was something, the beginning of the month, and the status was offline, I deleted everything. So yeah, if there are no more questions, I think we can finish here. And thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be outside and happy to answer them.